Hello and welcome. Thank God it's Friday. Hello and welcome to the UBE Academy Friday afternoon chill out. Today we are going to talk about mobility, or to quote The Who, we are going mobile. I want to talk today about the future of mobility. What's going on? What will be happening? What is just hype, and what is really going to change? What is for real? And who's better placed for a discussion on these topics than my dear friend, Professor Dr. Christian Böttger. Hello, Christian. Professor Böttger, may I call you Christian? And I go back a very long way, and we're both professors at the same university. But unlike me, who spends his Friday afternoons talking and chilling, he's actually doing the work. He's a renowned expert when it comes to mobility, an expert when it comes to railway mobility. He was one of the experts supervising and analyzing the ill-fated project Stuttgart 21 a few years back. And he's the author and editor of one of the leading industry newsletters on railway mobility in Germany. So thank you, Christian. Great for coming by, and thank you for joining me today on our discussion on mobility.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oliver. Thank you, Gerhard, for inviting me. Okay, I have been asked to talk a little bit about mobility, what's going on. I mean, with the UBE dealing a lot with digitalization, so we should take a look into that. And so I thought I could be telling a little bit what my view is. And
okay, so, but before we do this, I know you are a man of a soft tone and voice, but also of a strong opinion, and this is why I have asked you to join you. But really, to demystify a couple of trends, let's start with a little quiz. Are you ready? So my first question is, do you have any idea how much the public transportation system has suffered due to COVID-19? Do we have a number for that?
Yeah, in Germany, there is a recent number from the rail regulator, and they estimate that the entire damage for the industry is about 2.5 billion for the year 2020, which is much lower than some of the safety packages that the government has provided. So probably the real damage is a little bit lower than forecasted so far.
Okay, and then the next question is, so we're both based in Berlin. Berlin is the hub, the super hip metropolitan region of e-mobility, shared economy, etc. Has car ownership gone down in Berlin over the last years? So are we really walking the walk and not just talking the talk?
No, actually, the car ownership ratio is still going up in Berlin, though slowly. But if you see all the offers that we have here in Berlin with ride-hailing and car sharing and scooters and everything, you would expect that there must be any impact. However, the car ownership ratio in Berlin, it is increasing steadily by about 2 percentage points, from 31% to 33%. And so in each year so far over the last decade, it has been increasing, and the same happening in 2020.
All right, friends, as I told you, this man knows his numbers. Okay, let's kick off with the first thing that we prepared. Oil is dead. Long live oil. Well, let's assume for a minute that climate change is happening at the pace we scientists are forecasting. Do we all have to stop traveling? Are electric cars our future or our salvation? Is traveling too cheap? What are the trends here?
Yeah, here in this blog, I will really focus on the topic of replacing oil-based mobility. I mean, what we have to see is currently about 20% of the emissions worldwide are coming from mobility, and the majority of that coming from individual cars, and then a big chunk still coming from freight, from trucks, and another part from airlines, and then a little bit still from sea-based traffic. And so if we want to reduce emissions in general, there's no way that we have to tackle emissions emissions in transportation as well. And what we have to see is that our entire lifestyles in the Western countries, in the industrialized countries, that it is shaped by the availability of individual cars. I mean, the way we live, the way we shop, the way we spend our leisure time would hardly be thinkable without individual cars. This is a little bit different if you really live in the centers of big cities. So all the decision makers living inside the city ring in Berlin may see that slightly different, but as soon as you get out of that area, things look quite difficult. And actually, if you really live on the countryside or in the suburbs, really you need the car. Otherwise, you can't bring your kids to school. You cannot really shop. Your soccer club or whatever you do for the leisure time is hardly accessible without individual cars. And so therefore we have to see that the individual car is really deeply rooted in our society, and it really shaped the way we live and we shop. And therefore it's very hard getting rid of that. And,
okay, so then I just going to buy me a new Tesla and the climate is saved.
Yeah, I mean that's the next point. What I was about to say is that it would be very unpopular with voters as well to tackle individual car ownership. So, and currently the idea is that I said, yes, electric cars will be the solution, and all you got to do is you just plug in your electric car into the power line, and then there will be an emission-free transportation available. No, it's not. And with current figures, you may argue about details. Electric cars have a well-to-wheel emission that is close to the emission that you have in combustion cars. And so at the moment, ecologically, there is hardly an advantage of really having electric cars. They're very popular wherever they're subsidized. And if you see how they're subsidized in Germany at the moment, you can say there's an implicit premium of about 3,000 euros per ton of saved carbon emission, which is extraordinarily huge. And you can see, you've seen that in China, once the subsidies stopped, people stopped buying electric cars because without subsidies, without other advantages like preferred access to cities or so, they're not really competitive at the moment.
Maybe for the non-experts, well-to-wheel. This means what do you say, the balance, or the if you do the accounting properly, then you're saying that it doesn't make a difference whether I drive a Tesla or a Porsche 911.
Yeah, exactly. And the big difference is that, I mean, in principle, manufacturing a car causes some emissions. As long as you mainly have metal bashing and a little bit of plastic parts, that's not that significant. However, the battery takes significant energy to produce. And if you include this, then actually some of the theoretical advantage of having an electric car will disappear because you already consumed so much energy producing the battery. And if you include that into the calculation, that means from the production of the car up to the scrapping of the car, if you include that and see what is the total emissions that you need, then the advantage of the electric cars in terms of emissions is diminishing currently. This will be better as far as we have a better mix in our energy consumption. However, at the moment, we're in the range of about 50-50 between fossil-based fuels and renewables. But this will not change easily for the years to come. And that means currently you can see the advantage is quite low, really having an electric car in terms of emissions. And so
we do have to stop traveling then.
Well, that's that would be the political impact. And I say, at least giving today's technology, electric cars are not the solution, even though there is high subsidies for that. And you can see the subsidy pattern that we have today are in a way that you cannot easily stop just going for electric cars, because the entire industry is prepared for that and they're relying on the subsidies that have been promised to them for the next 10 years.
So no, my problem is I truly hate mass transportation. I hate trains. I hate everything where I'm not in full control of my of who's sitting next to me. Why don't we have electric cars that drive by themselves? Is autonomous driving, does it play any role? Because I understand if the energy balance is not really that favorable for electric cars, is autonomous driving improving, or has autonomous driving the potential to improve this dismal performance of electric cars?
Yeah, I think you really have to separate that. I mean, there is no direct link between electrical cars and autonomous driving. It's a different thing. And if you say, what is really the point about autonomous driving? As long as you have individual cars, that means you want to go from your house to the university. You got to transport yourself. So if the car goes autonomous, you have some more time to relax or read a magazine in the morning. However, you still will be in the car. So the advantage is quite low, yeah, because you'll be sitting in the car anyway. And most trips in Germany are done by one person only. Might be different if you want to pick up your son in the soccer club. You could send the car on its own if you really had an autonomous car available, but that's only a minority of the trips that we have today. So it's a little bit different as soon as you think of a commercial car. And there clearly there's an advantage if you could really substitute the driver. But still, it's going to be expensive. And if you say, what is it? A taxi at the moment in Germany, it costs about 1.6 or 1.8 euros per kilometer. And about 50% roughly is for the driver. And if you replace the driver, you need a little bit for technology and supervision. And so that means you talk about something in the range of €1 per kilometer. This will not be the way how we're going to be transported in the future. Yeah. And so I cannot really see what is the big point, the mass point of autonomous driving, and how this is really going to reshape mobility right now. And
there's one thing when just is this going to be the transport of the future? There's another thing that I see rarely discussed in the public, and I wonder what's your take on it. We both traveled extensively in the last 10 years and 12 years to China, and you see and we have let's say observed with a lot of interest the social scoring system that developed, that basically people receive bonus and malus points for their activities and how they behave. Well, my concern is that if you have autonomous driving, you're really giving away a substantial amount of individual liberty. Because why can't you just ban me renting a car? You know, I just have an Uber block in my smartphone. I can't hire those cars.
Okay, that's not really related to autonomous driving. I mean, autonomous driving, first of all, would mean you have your private car, but you can sleep while the car is driving. Yeah. So, and if we talk about different business models, we'll come to that in a moment. But I mean, in general, what you have to see is autonomous drives will generate additional data, and I mean, all the legal impacts. The question on who takes responsibility for all kind of traffic accidents. For example, what about the social control that the bus driver has in a school bus? Yeah, so all this will disappear, and so I think there is a couple of things where no one really thought about yet, and so I really cannot see what problem is really solved with autonomous driving in its own. Yeah, and so we can maybe leave that aside. And I mean, your question could be asked when we talk about shared mobility. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why don't we go over to shared mobility? Yeah. There's one thing. And maybe I kick off with shared mobility, with my take. My feeling, when COVID-19 kicked in, if I was an investor, I would have started to short sell all these mobility startups, because my first assumption was, okay, now COVID-19 is kicking in, mobility is reduced, especially leisure-driven mobility. Leisure time mobility, going from A to B as a tourist, etc. So the first companies that would go bust were bars, restaurants, and scooter rentals. Interesting enough, whenever I drive with my car into the city of Berlin, as you just said, I still see a lot of them scooters. So that's something that really surprised me. I thought they would drop like flies, but obviously they haven't, which is good for them and good for the investors. But nevertheless, is shared mobility saving us? We know autonomous driving will not. We'll just learn from you. Electrical cars, well, they may or may not have an impact. But how about the shared economy? Wouldn't that be great instead of these over investment that we have? I have a car. I own a car, which is probably 20 hours a day unutilized. Now suddenly I would have a much more efficient way to organize mobility, at least in larger cities.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Number one is what you have to see is we have a clear consolidation already going on with all those shared mobility and ride-hailing operators. I mean, Mercedes is about to write down hundreds of millions in their investments. In that, Lime has been taken over by Uber, and so you can see the consolidation is ongoing. And as far as I know, no one's really making money with it. And at the moment, you see, I mean, we have a situation where there's a lot of money on the market. We have a lot of wealthy investors, and there has been a lot of talk over the last years that the mobility of the future will be totally different, and there will be tons of money to be earned. And so all this money is invested currently, and I really, as I said, in a hurricane, even turtles can fly. Yeah, and but so far, no one's really making money with it. And the other thing is, if you take it from an ecological point of view, you can see that all surveys are showing that currently that shared mobility models or ride-hailing, whatever you look at, that they are mainly replacing walking or public transport. Yeah, no one is abandoning their own cars, but actually you take trips that you would have taken by taxi, you would have taken by subway or so. You may take them with a ride-hailing service or with a shared car, but actually no one is replacing their individual cars. And you can see the car ownership is continue to grow, and there is an impact. But then you really talk about a limited number of big cities, for example, where ride-hailing is replacing taxis. And if you take the inefficiency of taxi system, think of New York with an inefficient regulation with its medals, where someone not working at all is making an awful lot of money at the expense of the workers there, or the lack of provision of sufficient number of taxis like in China, or actually the strict regulation for taxis in Germany, which do not apply to Uber. They make it attractive. They cause a niche, but basically the niche is just because they say, well, we have red tape in the existing industry, but we allow others to ignore those rules. We allow them not to pay taxes. We allow them to evade social security rules, etc. And that causes some of the attraction. But if you strip that, I think there's a little left for these models. And on the other hand, you have to see. Everyone's just looking into the city of Berlin, and that's really different. But the question is, how would you organize that for yourself living in a suburb? I mean, you want to have a trip all across the city to the university in the morning, and you want to have a trip back, and possibly you want to go in the evening to a bar downtown somewhere. But all your neighbors have a similar pattern. And right now, everyone decided to take their own cars, even though it's very expensive, and not to share the subway for that. But so it's not efficient if you expect the car at your door in the morning that brings you back in the evening smoothly, then actually, if everyone has the same pattern, there's no savings effect. The savings effect is there if the car can be moving all time long, as you can expect it in downtown areas. But that's it. And so I cannot really see the big viability of this. And right now what you see is it is mainly financed by investors currently. No one's making money. And plus there is a niche in the market that really comes from regulations that are not as tight as for the incumbent operators, but mainly it's no good for the for emission savings, and even a small scooter has more emissions if you include all the recharging at night or so, it has more emissions than a regular car. Yeah? And so I really cannot see why there's any public support for that. But it does sound
that was really weird. I remember the first time I saw these big lorries at nighttime in Berlin, bringing all these scooters back to base so they can be recharged. And I just looked at it and said, well, I may have no idea about mobility, but I know a bit about business models. This is not a scalable business model. And then a week or so later, I think maybe you want to tell the story. You went to a conference where the public transport guys were gathering, and it was their annual ballyhoo. And I think one of these scooter companies, they were presenting their business and their models, and it was quite eye-opening how they believe they could finance themselves. Maybe you want to talk about this, because I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. Okay, but if we go on, looking at the time, the question is there any additional effects that we didn't look at if we combine certain things? For example, is there a new business model if we combine shared mobility and autonomous driving? In theory, it could be. Okay, we have, if a autonomous driven car is driving all the time, it's picking up and dropping off passengers, you don't have to look for any parking spots or so. There might be additional efficiencies. However, if you look at them, I don't think they are really impressive. And so at the moment, there's really a fashion that is that if we mix together all those three things, somehow something great will come out that will really transform mobility. And right now, I really cannot see that. And I think on the one hand, it's fair to look into new technologies and into new business models. But if you see how easily at the moment rules are changed for that and money is funded for those new models compared to the existing way to efficient mobility, which is public transport, I think it's just not the right movement that we have at the moment.
Is COVID-19 a game changer or an accelerator? As we know, when it comes to home office, working remotely, etc., COVID-19 has just basically accelerated trends and tendencies that were obvious or slowly evolving already. Now, COVID-19 has hit the public transportation and the mobility sector, maybe not as hard as predicted, but nevertheless, it has. Is it a game changer?
It's very hard to predict. You can see there's a lot of studies at the moment suggesting that our leisure time spending will change a little bit, and that people will work more in the home office and that business travel will suffer. I'm not too sure this is going to happen. I mean, the question is COVID really there to stay? I mean, I'm always an optimist and say it's going to be eradicated. We're going to find better treatments for that. This has been forgotten over the last month, even though there has been some progress as well. And we don't know how efficient vaccination really is going to be, but still I'm quite optimistic that it's going to go away. If we're going to live for a 10-year period where I said there's always a risk, even though it's low, this may damage public transport a little bit, but currently I'm quite optimistic. And if you see, I mean, with this Fridays for Future movement over the last years, everyone said, well, this is really a game changer and people will change their mobility. No, nothing's happening. The people are flying, the same people who are protesting on a Friday or skipping school on Friday to protest for a better environment. They go to a weekend trip to Barcelona with a low-quality aircraft on a Friday evening. Yeah, and so if you can see pre-COVID, despite all this Friday for Future movement, actually airlines have been doing great. And so I think traveling is really something that is deeply rooted in us, and I'm very doubtful that we're going to have an ongoing effect by COVID. So I think it will switch back quite easily after that. But to be fair, a lot of experts think different.
Okay. I will not comment on your strong opinion about Fridays for Future protesters, and I will leave this as it is. I only want to add, I will probably disagree. However, Now, what have we learned? Electrical mobility.
I have one point before the 60 seconds, please.
Yeah.
One more point. Actually, I think the view is very important. That I said I may sound quite critical to new technologies, but I think the really interesting thing is that we have a lot of things happening at the moment, yeah, and nobody's really talking about that, but it's already happening, and there's a lot of room for technologies really to change mobility. But it's not the big things talking about flying taxis or delivery of the latest book with Amazon, but it's rather the small things happening. For example, autonomous driving in a public room where kids may be playing on the street. It's extremely complicated. However, autonomous driving, organizing that is much easier in certain limited cases. And you can see that for agriculture, yeah, for farming vehicles, a lot of things are happening, and probably they will be the first ones to introduce that in Germany. Or in public transport, that I said, the shunting that you do in the rail yards, yeah, where there is no kids running around. It's much easier to organizing there. Internationally, the first completely autonomous driven railway is a mining railway, 500-kilometer mining railway in an area where no one lives. Yeah, and this is where the changes are going to happen. And you can really go through that. As I said, there's a lot of room if you talk about platforms. Right now, 25% of the truck capacity in Germany are running idle. Yeah? If you can have a platform to better fill the capacity, actually, you can have huge impacts. Yeah? And you can really go through that. Autonomous driving right now. We have turning trucks that kill about 100 people per year in Germany. I mean, there is an easy assistant, a turning assistant that could prevent most of those accidents. And I mean, the industry has been very reluctant to introduce that, but actually there's tools available, and there's a lot of smaller scale things happening. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And this is ongoing. I think that's one of the strengths of the German industry as well, to work on those small things. I mean, the Californians are rather thinking in the big visions for the future in 20 years, but I think Germany is not doing that bad, really working on this, on those smaller things. And I think this is something that should be noted, and that there's a lot of impact. And I mean, this is really a lot of points where you really can work on.
Okay, now having this, let's say, as a vision statement on your end, as we always do, the last 60 seconds, first of all, thank you so much, Christian, for coming. And I think that was quite a lot of food for thought for us. And although I tend to disagree with most of the stuff you're always saying, this time I really have to agree. Yes, this was really extremely meaningful and resonating with me. However, the last 60 seconds, my dear friend, belong to you. Tell us everything you always wanted to say on TV.
Okay, I think it's just summarizing up. I think that the big visions that we have currently regarding the new models of mobility, that they won't be implemented for the decades to come. I think they're heavily overrated currently, really driven by the desire to change things, and at the same time not to rock the boat when it really comes to car drivers, which are an important group of voters. You shouldn't forget, 2/3 of Germans never use public transport. For them, mobility is cars, yeah? And nobody who wants to win an election can do without those. And so I don't really think this is changing. However, it's a convenient story for politics to say, yes, a lot of things are happening and it's all going into the right direction. Don't be concerned. We won't take away your car. Something else is going to happen. And however, I think there's a permanent task of really trying to change mobility to make it better. And I think it's rather the incremental changes that we can do, and really part of the entire value chain in transport really has a lot of room for improvement. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of smaller items where you can really work on, and where the industry can work on really to make them better when it comes to planning, when it comes to digital products. And this is how we can mobility better on incremental ways. Still, it would be better if we could go big steps, but we just have to admit that a majority of voters will not be supporting that currently. That's it.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Gerhard, for producing this. This was episode 35 of the UBE Academy Friday Chill Out. Stay tuned. Next week we will dive into crazy and fantastic entrepreneurial business models. So far, stay healthy, always wear a mask, and yes, use public transportation even in times like these. It obviously is not as dangerous as I thought it was. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.